So what I have here is I have created stencils off of my image. These stencils are all separated and labeled by the color that I can use. Now, just because I label them that color in particular, for instance, this one says red, does not mean that it has to be used as those colors. Here's dark tan, tan, and I got one here labeled blue. So even though my blue one has the smallest amount on here, one thing it has that I haven't discussed with you guys yet is what I call a registration mark. Alright, you guys see this registration mark? This registration mark, you'll notice, is on every single one of my stencils. And what you do is you line up your registration mark every single time. For instance, I had 2 stencils earlier thinking that I had two sets of stencils, and I was like, man, I got like 10 stencils for like one piece. And then the registration marks let me know very quickly, no, this is 2 different pieces. So what I want you to do when you start creating these is you'll have your image, and when you start to trace them, you'll create a registration mark. Something where you can tell, not a circle, but something where you can tell, like, this is the top versus this is the bottom, this is the right side versus this is the left side. This is like a little heart with an extra little loop at the end of it. So I can tell specifically how everything goes. And you can see that all of them match up. I can see all the way through to my tan paper. So that's the first step that you need to do before you do anything else with creating your stencils. Then the next thing you'll do is you'll actually use a light box, or you use the windows, and first thing you do is for each sheet of paper, you create that registration mark, all right? And then you decide what color this is going to be. So this is my red color. And I cut out everything. I draw everything on that stencil, and then I cut out everything that I would use for red. Got it? Then I move on from there. So that's why we do the color blocking. So for instance, this red one, everything red-wise will be cut out perfectly right here. Do you guys see that, how it fits on the paper? So everything's red. So I'm going to start here. First of all, who has a pencil? Pencil? So the first step I'm going to do is I am going to trace my registration mark. It just needs to be traced lightly with a pencil. Yeah. Trace lightly with a pencil, because in the end you're going to wind up erasing it. You want to make sure that your registration mark's traced, so that no matter what stencil we use next, that'll be what we create. So for this process, instead of red, I'm going to go with hot pink this time. Take my brush, and I'm going to paint lightly in those stencils. I'm not going to paint my registration mark, although if you really like your registration mark, one of my pieces, not this one, but my other piece, which is a little bit more complicated piece, I actually love my registration mark, so I actually add it to the piece of artwork, but this one in particular I'm not going to. So notice how I am painting first from the stencil out. Do you guys see that? Painting out this way. I'm going to do that in my outline and make sure that I don't have too much water. My paintbrush, I just basically just dampened it a little bit. And I'm brushing out from my stencil, making sure I cover it. Also, I'm holding down my stencil where I'm painting. This paint's so thick. All right. So then I'm going to have someone finish that section for me, and I'm going to move on to this section. Doing the same technique. Okay, so this is what it looks like once everything's dry. The next thing we are going to do is we're going to pick our next one, which is our tan. It's our skin tone. We're going to line up our registration marks. Make sure those are perfect. Having a somewhat complicated registration mark really helps you make sure that everything's lined up in place the way that it should be. Alright, so now this color is just tan, it's our skin tone. So I'm going to grab a couple volunteers here. They're going to help me paint in my skin tone. And again, we're just doing with a nice tan layer. And we start from the edge, swipe our way in. Go ahead, join in. You don't want to clump on the skin tone too much. Make sure it's nice and layered out. And you want to hold down the stencil when you get near it. Make sure it's all spread out evenly. So while you're doing this, one of the smart things to do is to get your first layer down with your stencil, but because of how we're doing this process, it may even benefit you if you need to do another layer of color on your stencil, that you can actually just take your stencil away and kind of clean up the edges if you want to. No. As you can see here, some of my tan already needs multiple